Fathers love everyone and welcome. I was asked a question in the speakeasy the other night. Well, we all ask a question about why we do what we do. And I gave an answer. But you know, I've really been thinking about that question because there's been a lot going on behind the scenes, which is sort of why I started doing this series right here, The False Doctrine and Wolves Among Us. It's because I noticed a false doctrine had crept in, and I was worried about it. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's get back to the question. Why do I do what I do? And I guess to really answer that question, I would have to tell you a little bit about how I got where I'm at. So you might consider this a testimony of sorts. But understand that everything I'm about to say, I say in no way to glorify myself, or to make you think more of me, or to... It has nothing to do with me. Understand that what I'm about to tell you is only accomplished through the Spirit and Jesus and what they did for the Father and do for the Father. So here goes nothing. There's no script. I have no notes. Just trying to share something. When I thought about that question, prayed about it, it's just something the Father laid on my heart to share. Because this is not at all what part 2 of this little series was supposed to be. But as usual, once I ignored the flesh and listened to the Father, this is what part 2 has become. So why do I do what I do? Well, like I said, first of all, you have to see where I'm at and where I've come from. Now, some of you know through some of my live shows and personal videos, or private, but whatever you want to call it, the videos I've made and the lives I've done. Some of you know a little bit about me. I started basically believing in Jesus when I was very young. Probably, I don't know. I'm 55, so most of those memories are gone. But I do remember I started mighty young, probably 8, maybe 7, I don't know, maybe 6. Somewhere back there. And I always believed in Jesus. Believed what they were saying, you know, in the Sunday school. Believed the story as they told it. Said the prayer and pretty much figured I was covered. Jesus loves me. He did it all and forgives me. And I believed that. Well, I would say I always believed that. But I lived a pretty decent life. I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. I spent my time in the woods. A loner. Not really a social person. Mainly because every time I was around people, I usually got beat up or made fun of. Weren't no bullying and stuff back then. That was part of growing up. Being a man. In fact, if I would get beat up in school and when I come home, then I would pretty much get a licking for not defending myself, because I wouldn't fight back. Even then, I don't know. I didn't really understand the fighting. So that went on, probably till 10th grade, maybe. Probably. Maybe ninth. I'm thinking 10th. And I made a friend. A real friend. We're still friends to this day. In fact, we live 2 houses apart. It's funny how the Lord works. And still never really fought, never really defended myself, but never really had to anymore, because my friend was a pretty big fella. But I started to, when I made the friend, we started to do what high school kids do at that age, a little drinking. Played a lot of cards, pool, for money, of course. That pretty much went on till 12th grade when I went in the service. In the Army. Well, the only reason I went in the service was to get away from here. I said I didn't have the greatest childhood. No, it wasn't horrid. It wasn't as bad as a lot of the poor children out there, what they've went through. But it wasn't great. Let's put it that way. And when I went in the service, 18 years old, barely 18, my birthday's in June, so it just turned 18, I mean, not even a week old at 18. I'm on an airplane heading to El Paso. Ain't never been out of this little town my whole life. Well, I mean, we'd go to like Philadelphia to the zoo, or so a couple cities around Pennsylvania, but like I said, mostly in the country. Not really a social person. Here I am on a plane heading to boot camp in a whole different state. But we're not going to make a long story. Get down there, do what you do in the Army. Get into a little bit of drugs. In fact, my sergeant told me, you're either an alcoholic or a drug addict if you're in the service. Choose one, some or both. I'm just stating what I was told. So, already enjoying the alcohol, I just figured I'd do both. That started on quite the journey. I spent time in El Paso, as I said, in the service, and I went to Germany. Pretty much had forgot all about Jesus or the Father. They were not even on my mind, really. Sort of back there, but not on my mind. In fact, I started studying everything. And I mean everything. I studied witchcraft, figured out how that worked, seen it in action, it does work. Studied a little bit of Buddhism, read the Tao. Cultism. I could tell you stories about Ouija boards that you wouldn't even believe. I had a Ouija board, and anytime I would touch it, it would fly. It played the organ. It was quite the thing. I could tell you Ouija board stories. But it ain't about that. This ain't about me. That's why I don't like to even give whatever you might call a testimony. This is not about me. You just got to understand all this to understand the end. Because how can we understand the end if we don't start at the beginning? So, needless to say, this was the 80s, Germany. I mean, heavy metal concerts, monsters of rock, hash, alcohol, making big bucks, costing me nothing to live. So, hog wild. Fully, and by now fully and willingly, serving the enemy. Satanism. Sacrifices, conjurings. We're not going to get into all that. Had a first wife with a child that I adopted, basically. Wasn't my child, but was born when we were married, had my name. Lost all that. Lost the service. drunk, crazy, and rebellious, and full-fledged, working for the enemy. Long story short, come home, lived crazy for the next, man, 30 years maybe? Not quite, 25. Found another woman, had more children. Wasn't quite as bad as I had been, but was still very bad. Still basically serving the enemy. Not full-fledged, not purposely anymore, but definitely not serving the Father, so serving the enemy. Because you can't do both. If you serve the Father, you don't serve the enemy. If you're not serving the Father, whether you're meaning to or not, you're serving the enemy. But by now I had a lot of knowledge in a lot of the occult, the paranormal, Satanism, Buddhism, New Age, spiritualism, whatever you want to call it. Pretty much everything. I always had a mind that seeked knowledge. I always enjoyed reading, stuff like that. So basically, again, to make a long story short, or as short as possible, time goes on. The new wife, 3 children, horrible father, horrible husband. I got to the point where I almost lost it all again. Because I'd already lost it all a few times. The first wife, military career, sanity. I'd already lost everything many times by now. And I was at the breaking point of losing it all again, all from my own fault. In fact, why my wife stayed around those 20-some years, it took me a while to figure out. But luckily, this time, as it was all about to walk out the door and fall apart again, something inside me broke. I realized. I had a moment of sanity, if you will, and realized that I was about to lose it all again. And not too long later on, when I was alone, the Father brought me to my knees, my face, whatever you want to call it. And made me realize well, he didn't have to make me realize. I knew. The moment I was brought near him, into his presence, if you will, whatever you want to, I don't know what to call it. The moment I knew I was before God, not that I was literally there, but again, I don't know how to explain it. I realized how utterly justified that all-loving Father, the Creator of all things, how justified he would be to not allow me to enter his kingdom. Because why could an all-loving Father allow something like me to destroy perfect kingdom, I realized how everything I had done kept me from him. And I had no excuse, no reasoning, no way out. I was guilty. Guilty as charged. And believe me, there's a long list of charges. Excuse me, need a drink of tea. At that moment, and I guess I would basically, looking back now, I realize that's what Jesus meant when he said, pick up your cross and follow me. Because at that moment, I totally understood what it meant to nail my sins to the cross. I totally understood how unworthy and no excuse, again. How could I be mad at the Father when I had done this all? I'd done this. No one forced me to do this. Yeah, it may have been an enemy whispering in my ear, but I have free will. I chose to do it. I reveled in it for a while, a long while. So I fell down to my face, my knees, whatever you want to call it. This is all symbolically speaking, let's say. And realized it was over. I was going to lose everything again, but more importantly, not just the things of this world. I realized I had already lost the future. And I cried out, what can I do? I'm so unworthy. And it didn't last long. It seemed like probably hours. But it didn't last long. I don't know. Wasn't really paying attention to time at this point. But the Father says, don't you remember, my son? You used to know him. Do you remember why he did what he did? So that none of that matters. Now, like I said, I already said the fancy little prayer. So according to some doctrines that I personally don't believe, I couldn't lose my salvation. Well, I don't know. I know what I did. And if I was to have died in one of those moments of doing what I did, it would not be just to have allowed me to enter the kingdom of heaven. There's no doubt in my mind. I wouldn't even have argued the point. But we're not going to get into that. We're going to tell you how I got where I'm at, so you can understand why I do what I do. But I was reminded how all that I did, all that giant list, oh, it was a big scroll. It rolled out across the floor. Every charge correct. 100% guilty. Every one. And he reminded me that Jesus, if I would follow him and obey him, had already wiped all that away if I just believed and obeyed him. At that moment, I probably came as close as I will ever come to understanding the Father's love. Because no matter what I did to him all those years, if I would follow his son and believe on him and do what he told me to do, that none of that would matter. And every time I slipped in the future, it wouldn't matter. I can't even describe the feeling of joy, I can't even describe the feeling. If you've been there, you know the feeling. If you haven't been there, I suggest you get there, because the first thing Jesus said was to pick up his cross and follow him. We've got to do that. We've got to die. I died that day. The old man was dead, gone, obliterated. Yeah, the new flesh still stumbles once in a while. Still flesh. But that old man, I don't even like talking about him. I can't even believe I was him. He's dead. He died on the cross. That's what Jesus means when he says that. You've got to die on that cross. The old man has to die. There cannot be a new creation till the old man dies. Jesus taught that in his parables. You check it out. This is all about your journey. I'm just telling you about mine. So you can decide in the end what spirit I come to you in. Because that's really what it's all about. If you're going to listen to someone about spiritual things, the first thing you better do is test their spirit. Or you'll listen to anyone. I know. I see it happening. But that moment when I died, again, how do you even describe it? It's impossible. It's impossible to put into words. That you could comprehend. But there's no feeling like it. You'll know it when it happens to you. The next thought that entered my head was I never, ever wanted to do anything to ever cause pain and hurt to the Father. I had caused him enough. So much. I never wanted to do anything to hurt him again. Nothing was more important at that moment than just knowing I would do everything in my power from this moment on. Yeah, and I said my power. There's still a little wrong thinking involved. To never hurt him again. And then I asked for something that I probably, well, I won't say I regret it, but I wished I'd understood what I was asking for when I asked for it. Because I asked the Father to show me, just because I never wanted to upset him again, what really grieved his heart the most, just so I wouldn't do it. I had no clue what he was going to show me. And that started the journey where I went to learn about what grieved the Father's heart the most. And it was the children and what's being done to the children all around the world. And we're not even going to go there. because you don't really want to know. If you've researched it, you understand. If you haven't, I wouldn't. Unless the Father puts it on your heart. Because you're going to see things. You're going to see evil that you didn't even think was possible. And then that broke me. Bad. When I seen what was happening to the children, my heart was broken. But that's what I asked for. So I understood why I got it. But it didn't make it any easier. Because it isn't pretty. So I would just ride around and just literally have tears streaming down my face because all I could think about was what was happening to the children. And how it hurt the Father. And it hurt me. I don't know what you want to call it. Spiritual empathy. I don't know. Again, there isn't words. I just knew the sorrow the Father felt with what was happening to the children. And it was rough. Very rough. For quite a few weeks. And then finally one day I just couldn't take it. I just told the Father, I can't. This is too much. What can I do? I'm one man. I can't stop this evil. It's, like I said, it's out there and there's a lot of it. I can't take it anymore. You know, I'm sorry I asked for this. I can't take this sorrow. I don't know how you do it. This was only a few weeks. The Father's been dealing with this since creation. Man, I couldn't take it anymore. And then, luckily, because He is a loving Father, He gave me a, again, I don't even like to use words. We'll say vision, but that's the closest thing. Although it wasn't really a vision. But He sort of allowed me to see a little peek at what happened to those children. And allowed me to understand a little bit of, I don't know, the big picture, the end game, whatever you want to call it. But either way, when I seen what He showed me, then I can't say all the sorrow was gone, because it's still not good what they're doing. But I understood how the Father turned all that evil into something that's just... it's incredible. Even when I think of it now, it's so beautiful. So it made it a little bit easier to bear. Actually, it made it much easier to bear. But it also put me on the mission of asking for prayers for the children. And I know a lot of people don't get it. Or they want... It's too broad. It's too vague. They need names and reasons and... I don't know. I don't need them people praying anyway. The ones that understand and pray. That's all we need. If I have to explain it, then that's okay. I can do it privately if you'd like. And it's been in some of my videos. But there's lots of children that need our prayers. Just pick a group. Pick a child you know. It don't matter. Just pray for the children. Trust me. Evil loves destroying our children. I've seen it. That's real. They need our prayers. If you want to be a prayer warrior, there's something to pray over. They need it more than anyone. But trust me, there's a surprise coming when it comes to what the enemy's done to these children. We're going to leave that at that. The next thing the Father showed me, well, actually, I should have went back because it was probably the second thing, was I had to realize that I knew nothing. Nothing at all. I guess it happened around, once I seen what he showed me about the end game of the children, the part they play and everything. I realized that I knew nothing at all about what the Father has planned, nothing at all about why things go the way they go. All I knew was that Father turns all evil to good. I will guarantee you that. Whether you see it or not, all evil is turned to good in the end. And the minute I realized I knew nothing, that was the minute, I guess my spirit, you would say, opened up to being able to learn truth. Because, I thought I had a lot of truth. Like I said, I was well educated, well learned. I loved reading. I loved knowledge. I'm not trying to say I was, again, this is not about me. This is about one man's journey to show you how it possibly works. The minute I realized I knew nothing, the minute I realized I would do anything to not hurt the Father in any way ever again, the minute I start begging and pleading and asking for the Spirit to guide me and teach me so that I could learn exactly what I needed to do for Him. Because I understood that going to the cross, I died. But I also understood what a lot of them won't teach you. A lot of them will take you to the cross and tell you Jesus paid for our sins on the cross. It's all about Him. But that's such a sneaky... Yes, we start there, but that's step one. Jesus also told us to follow Him. Jesus also told us to obey Him. Jesus told us a lot more things than just pick up your cross and follow me. A lot more things. And that's what I'm trying to share. Is once you're broken, once you've died, once you truly seek the truth, and once you truly ask and receive the Spirit, you'll know you're on the right journey the minute you start realizing things in those scriptures that go against everything that you may have thought you knew before. Because I realized everything I thought I knew about salvation and the kingdom and the Father truly was garbage. It was indoctrination by the enemy. I know that. I see that. It's up to you to do this. I can't tell you what to do. I can't tell you whether or not to believe me. All I can tell you is you need to test every spirit, and you can't test every spirit till you have the right spirit to test it against. And the only way to get that spirit is to die. Just like Jesus said, die on that cross. Plead, because you will. plead for the Holy Spirit so that you never, never hurt the Father in any way again. And then ask for the truth. That's how the journey begins. That's just the beginning. Because when you start seeking the truth, as Jesus said, you'll find it. When you start knocking, as Jesus said, it'll be open. But Jesus said to follow him. Not just go to the cross and stay there. Follow him. But this is basically how I've got to where I am. This journey, well, when I died, it was probably, again, I don't know the exact year. I'm guessing 2008, possibly, 7, 9, I don't know. Somewhere in there. That's when the old man died. And here's a little example of a truth that the Spirit can show you that you may not have noticed, even though you've probably heard it or read it many times. John, which of course is my favorite book, as most of you know. But this is why. Because John constantly refers to himself as the one whom Jesus loved. The disciple whom Jesus loved. And a lot of people understand that as I used to understand that. In the worldly way, or the enemy's way, or whatever you want to call it. Everything has layers, especially the scriptures. But he came to show me, and this is why I love the book of John. First of all, it's all about Jesus' divinity, and I just love it. But because John always calls himself the disciple whom Jesus loved. And a lot of people think he does that maybe because he's arrogant. Oh, I'm the one Jesus loved. Maybe because he was just trying to poke a little fun at the other apostles. Hey, I'm the one Jesus loved. But John really did that. And this is what I've been showed. Again, you believe what you want. It's your journey, but you've got to start it before it's too late. Is that the reason John wrote that way when he wrote his gospel? Because John wrote it. Why did he write it that way? He wrote it that way, I was showed, not because he was arrogant. Exactly, pretty much the opposite of that. Is because John realized, like I realized that day I died on that cross, that the old man was dead. There was no more Ron. And John understood that. See, there was no more John for John. John was now the one whom Jesus loved. His name wasn't even worth saying. He understood that it wasn't about him. John was dead. The man who went by that name had died. He was just reminding himself of that. I think it's beautiful. I don't think it's haughty at all that he called himself that in his book. I think it's amazingly humble that he never mentioned himself in his book. That's just something to think about. A little truth I was showed, if you think I've been showed any truth. I'm not here, like I said, to talk about me at all, but to understand why I do what I do, which is how this whole conversation started. I had to show you how I got where I am. Everything I do I do for the Father. My will does not come into play. I'm not saying this to be haughty. I'm not saying this to make you think I'm better than anyone. Because none of this, none of it, is done by me. None of it can I take credit for. None of it. But how can I share truth with you in any other way? I'm not trying to be haughty. I'm not trying to pump me up at all. There is nothing I have that you can't have. I've said that before. This is not about me. This is about the will of the Father. This is about picking up my cross, which I did and died on it. And now this is about following Jesus. That's what he told me to do. That's what I'm going to do. You have to decide whether you think I'm really doing it or not. If not, get away from me. Why would you listen to someone if you don't think they're truly speaking in the Spirit? And if you do think someone is speaking in the Spirit, why wouldn't you listen to what they had to say? Again, that's the choice you have to make. No one can make that for you. But don't just blindly follow men because they can throw out a lot of scriptures. The Pharisees knew the scriptures quite well. The scribes wrote them, so I think they would know them quite well. That didn't mean anything. Jesus made that quite clear. So what I've learned on my little journey of 10 years or so now, of truly dying to myself as much as possible. Again, yes, I slip. I'm human. We're flesh. We slip. But if you're not striving, if it isn't even in your heart to not want to hurt the Father, the all-loving, you say how much he loves you, then why do you not worry about hurting him? Because when we sin, we hurt him. Love has to correct. That's another thing that I learned. But I've also learned to love the correction because it's made me better. Without the correction, if I wouldn't have died that day, if I wouldn't have been corrected, who knows where I'd be? I know I wouldn't be here. So the point I'm trying to make in this long rambling is that everything I do, I try to do for the Father. It's all his will. Every video I make, every live discussion I have, I try to do it for the Father. Do I do it well? I don't think so. When I listen back sometimes, I realize how far I'm a human. I try to express in human words things that can really only be showed in the Spirit. So all I can do is share things with you and beg you to get to know the Father, the Son, and the Spirit before it's too late. That's all that matters to me. So the reason I do what I do is strictly for the Father. I had a discussion. Well, it wasn't really a discussion. But someone was tearing me up, basically. Because every time they would ask me something, I would quote Jesus. Or if they would ask me how I knew something, I would say because of the Spirit. And they said, that was an excuse I was falling back on. How do I argue with that? I can't argue with that. That's all I have. It's up to you whether or not to believe it. I can't deny it. I'm sure not going to deny the Spirit. I ain't going to deny Jesus. I'm not going to deny the Father. So if you think when I say them as my answer to whatever the question may be, that's all I got. That's all I want.